Good morning and welcome to the Grim. I'm your host, Kristen. On today's episode, we'll be opening the gate and entering Old Burial Hill, located in Marblehead, Massachusetts. So grab your favorite mug, cozy up, and let's take a dig into history. Just days away from Halloween, it's the perfect time to jump into a ghoulish graveyard, or we find fitting to open the gate in one of the most scenic graveyards on the East Coast that was featured in the cult classic movie Hocus Pocus. Making the journey during the fall season, many find themselves in Salem looking for where they filmed the iconic scenes in Town Hall, Salem Common, and Max's house, all of which are pretty much near each other, with the exception of Old Burial Hill. That's around 10 minutes away in Marblehead. Yet the small journey some might not consider necessary is absolutely worth it when you enter its gates. Perched on the high ground between Marblehead's colonial residential area and retail district, its views of Marblehead Harbor and Salem Sound are simply stunning. I myself go at least once a year to visit Old Burial Hill, and every time I find it even more beautiful than I remembered it. Established in 1638, it's close to being one of the oldest documented burial grounds in the country, yet with its superb upkeep you might not notice. Yet its 1,000 residents quickly remind you of how old the grounds truly are, with Puritan gravestones featuring diverse stone carving artwork from the 17th century. While not directly in Salem, this smaller burial ground has heaps of history. 600 of its residents alone were soldiers in the Revolutionary War, but many of the gravestones are worn from time, so some visitors aren't really aware of their service to their country. This was also the site where Marblehead's first meeting house was built around 1638, the same time the grounds were established in the use of a graveyard. A cluster of gravestones just below the crest of the hill is home to foreign ministers of the First Congregational Church: Samuel Cheever, John Bernard, William Whitwell, and Ebenezer Hubbard. Some refer to this as Minister's Row or Parson's Row, but the four aren't really aligned to be in a row, which it makes it kind of confusing when you're looking for the graves. Following the path upward, visitors will see at the center of the top of the hill's highest point two obelisks and a gazebo. One of the obelisks at the far end is a tribute to the Revolutionary War hero Captain James Mugford and his crew of the schooner Franklin. The captain was one of the first naval heroes and performed one of the most daring captures of the American Revolution. At the beginning of the Revolutionary War, Mugford was impressed to serve for the British Navy and confined aboard a gunboat in Marblehead Harbor, as he was originally a master of a merchant vessel. This at first was an unfortunate event that proved very useful, as he overheard other sailors on board boasting of a powder ship due to set sail from England to America. Yet the ship wasn't just carrying powder, it was also carrying ammunition and stores to restock the besieged British Army. Mugford was soon released and then immediately informed colonial authorities of the information he had learned aboard. At this time, the British evacuated Boston in March of 1776, but left behind a small part of their fleet in Boston's lower harbor. This was to warn ships bringing supplies into the harbor that Boston was in colonial hands and to turn back. Captain Muckford quickly requested permission to equip his ship, the schooner Franklin, and challenge enemy ships. This was all in preparation for the powder ship named Hope that would soon enter Boston's harbor. You see, when the Hope had set sail, the British were still in control of Boston harbor, but now weren't. Sure enough, on May 17th, in 1776, the transport ship carrying 300 tons hove into sight, which is the nautical term for coming into view. The captain, ready for her arrival, bore down on her immediately and prevented her from sailing by ordering her crew to cut the topsail hardtail ties. They, of course, refused, but the captain threatened all aboard with instant death if they didn't obey. Terrified, the crew, against the wishes of their officers, cut the ties and surrendered. Moving quickly, they avoided the British guns still in the lower harbor by bringing the Hope through a narrow channel known as Pulling Point Gut. Then, the Continental agent in the Boston harbor, Colonel Jonathan Glover, rushed 150 soldiers along with hiring the best pilot in Boston to move the ship into port. In the pitch black dark of the night, they placed lanterns on the buoys throughout the channel to light the way, and by daylight, the ship was anchored and under control of the Continental Army. Captain Mugford and his crew had successfully stolen Britain's prized powder ship, giving a blow to their forces and rearming the Continental Army. Later, in 1808, Colonel Joseph Ward would write to a friend stating, "This capture was of immense worth to our country, as our armies were almost destitute, and it was impossible to import powder or obtain it by any other means than taking it from the enemy." Such was the extreme want of powder at the time to defend the country that I believe if the prize ship had been fully loaded with gold or diamonds, it would have not caused equal joy or have been equal value to the United States. The name of Captain Mugford ought to be immortalized in America. But the captain wasn't just done with the British quite yet, pulling out to sea 2 days later. This time, the Franklin hit bottom and became grounded in the channel where the Hope was seized in broad daylight and in direct view of British vessels. Seeing the Franklin grounded, the British sent out 14 boats to capture the captain and his crew. Letting them come within range, the captain then fired his guns, effectively sinking two of the ships at once, but was still surrounded. His crew, rallying behind the brave captain, fought off the British who repeatedly attempted to board his ship. They defended their ship off with anything on board pikes, cutlass, and spears. But as hard as the crew fought, the captain fought harder. He was reported anywhere and everywhere in the fight when most needed. Then, tragically, he was shot through the chest, dying as he called out to his lieutenant, "I am a dead man. Don't give up this vessel. You will be able to beat them off." Then died minutes later. His death only rallied his crew to fight harder, and in a half an hour, the British gave up. The British had lost 70 men attempting to take the grounded ship, but only one single man was killed on the Franklin, her beloved Captain Mugford. His story, along with his crew, is just one of many brave soldiers and sailors who fought for independence fiercely in the Revolutionary War. Sadly, according to historical records, Captain Mugford and his crew were never honorably ruminated. In 1854, Governor Broughton of Marblehead, an agent for the heirs of the captain and the crew, argued for recognition and payment, saying it was a simple price considering the men had put their lives on the line. No payment or recognition was ever given to the men, and still to this day. Only the obelisk memorial and personal papers of the captain, now owned by the Marblehead Historical Society, exist. The memorial was first dedicated near the Boston and Maine Railroad station on the 50th anniversary, then moved on the 100th anniversary to the burial ground. So if you see yourself at the obelisk for the captain and his crew, please give them thanks for the part of the freedom we enjoy today that they certainly deserve our gratitude toward. The sudden obelisk near the middle was dedicated in 1846 to the Marblehead fishing fleet. Once a rich fishing industry, Marblehead was struck with tragedy when the fleet was caught in a hurricane while fishing in the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. At least 11 vessels were lost at sea, and with them 65 men. Sadly, the fishing fleet never recovered from the loss. The Marblehead Charitable Seamen Society was founded from the tragic event, and the society collected a fund for the monument to remember the brave men's grim fate, and the rest was then donated toward their families. As with many burial grounds near Salem, it's hard not to come by a resident not tied to the Salem witch trials. A memorial for one of the victims unjustly tried is Wilmot Redd. For some, if you're Googling, you might recognize Reed's name for the pond that was near her home renamed after her. Her actual grave is unknown, but the memorial stands for her here to remember her by. Known to her neighbors as Mama Red, she was the wife of Samuel Reed, a fisherman from Marblehead. Many of her neighbors had considered Mama Red as a witch for years, but her performances or beliefs never troubled them one bit. She was rumored to cause milk to curdle as soon as it left the cow and turn newly churned butter into wool if she touched it. Perhaps it was her rumored belief that certain children deserved to have a bloody cleaver at the end of their cradle, causing the child to sicken and die, that was her undoing. It wasn't until the Salem witch trials that Red was drawn out of obscurity. In fact, until her examination with the accusers, there was no known acts of witchcraft against her. Then, as was with most examinations, the afflicted girls put on a show. Mary Walcott claimed she was pinched by Mama Red, and she bought her a mysterious book. Abigail Williams had a full on fit, Ann Putnam said Mama Red never hurt her but watched as she hurt others. Elizabeth Hubbard claimed she tried to get her to sign the Book of the Devil and knocked her down when she refused. The accused accusations during the examination were long, lengthy, and filled with outrageous behavior. But what was most interesting was Red's warrant. Before the examinations, no accounts were filed against her of any actions or harm of witchcraft. Her warrant for her arrest was signed by the magistrates Jonathan Corwin and John Hawthorne, featured in episode 2, The Hanging Judge of Witches and Haunts of Charter Street. It was another innocent victim falsely accused due to malicious intent. On September 22nd, 1692, Wilmot Redd was hung for detestable arts called witchcraft and sorceries wickedly, maliciously, and feloniously perused, practiced, and exercised at the town of Salem. She was sadly one of the 19 innocent victims claimed by witch hysteria in the village. Of the Revolutionary War heroes within is General John Glover. Glover was an American fisherman, merchant, politician, and military leader from Marblehead, Massachusetts. He's known for officially starting the United States Navy. Glover started out in life as a cobbler, rum trader, and eventually a ship owner and international merchant. Before the Revolutionary War, he was active in the militia for many years, and in 1775 was elected to lieutenant colonel of the 21st Massachusetts Regiment for Marblehead. His colonel passed away shortly after, and he became commander of his unit. He and his men then marched to Boston, joining the siege in June of 1775. While there, his schooner, the Hannah, raided British supply vessels and became the first vessel of the Continental Navy, later known as the United States Navy. His regiment rode Washington across the Delaware to safety after losing the Battle of Long Island and leading one of the first integrated regiments in the American Revolution. Glover might not be known by many Americans today by name, but is famous from a painting known to almost all. In the dead of the night, Glover and his men ferried Washington's army on confiscated river coal ore boats across the Delaware River. In the early morning on December 26th, in 1776, Washington's men were then able to launch a surprise attack on Hessian forces at the Battle of Trenton in New Jersey. This crossing is famously depicted in a painting by Emmanuel Lutz named Washington Crossing the Delaware. After the battle, Glover then returned home to tend to his sick wife and turned down a promotion. He then rejoined after a personal appeal from George Washington himself, becoming a brigadier general. After Cornwall's surrender in Yorktown in October 1781, he returned to Massachusetts, but in 1782 retired due to his failing health. He purchased British loyalists' confiscated land from the state, establishing Glover Farm in 1781 and retired there. Glover would live out the rest of his days on the farm, but was visited in 1784 by Marquis de Lafayette. The two had fought together in the American Revolution and had shared the hardships and victories of the battlefield, as well as the friendship of General George Washington. Glover's soldiers were known to be from diverse backgrounds, unlike many other regiments made up mainly of Caucasian males. He was also known to treat every man equally, regardless of race. On January 30th, in 1797, General John Glover passed away after contracting hepatitis. He is buried in a brick tomb within Old Burial Hill. His death is commemorated annually by the Glover's Regiment, a memorial lantern procession to his tomb, and a three-volley gun salute. Each year, the regiment, a dedicated group of reenactors, take part in special events throughout the year, commemorating the achievements of Glover and his regiment. Sadly, his farm, though a historical landmark, is due for demolition this year. It's important places such as Glover's Farm that deserve preserving so Americans know more of their own history and the people who built the foundations of our country, giving a lot more meaning into our dig into history on this episode of The Grimm. Burial Hill has Revolutionary War heroes, a general, fishermen, and Americans who built America, and Joseph Brown, someone you might have never heard of, but maybe a Joe Frogger cookie, who they were named after. Brown was the keeper of Black Doe Tavern in Marblehead, Massachusetts, along with his wife, Lucretia Thomas Brown. He was a freed former slave, most likely rewarded from his service in the Revolutionary War after serving under General Glover's regiment. Joe Brown was born to an African American mother and a Wampanoag father in 1750, and his wife Lucrezia was the daughter of two former slaves of Captain Samuel Tucker. The couple went in with another couple on the purchase of the Salt Box House on the top of Gingerbread Hill in Marblehead, and they would eventually buy the other couple out, but the tavern became known as a racially integrated gathering place for hard drinking fishermen in the area. His wife Lucrezia is credited with creating the cookie that became popular with fishermen and sailors because of their ability to be taken on long sea voyages. The cookie was originally created on a large skillet flavored with molasses, rum, spices of ginger, allspice, nutmeg, clove, and had a soft, chewy center. Sadly, Lucrezia's original recipe is now lost, but a recipe published by Mary Randolph in 1824, called the Tavern Cookies, is believed to be the closest to the original. The cookies are still popular in New England today and are sold at the Old Sturbridge Village Bake Shop in Sturbridge, Massachusetts. A strange resident of Old Burial Hill is Timothy Dexter, a businessman who seemed to live on a lot of luck. Dexter was born in Malden in the province of Massachusetts Bay to a poor Irish family who had very little schooling and started as a farm laborer. He then, in 1769, moved to Newburyport, where he married Elizabeth Framingham, a rich widow, and his life changed drastically. Using his new fortune, he purchased a mansion and set up shop in the basement along with his wife. Dexter then purchased a large amount of depreciated continental currency, an odd gamble at the time because it was worthless in value. However, his odd gamble paid off, and at the end of the war, the new American government made good on its notes at 1% of the face value, and he made a considerable profit. Dexter, due to his lack of education, made odd business choices that seemed in his time weird. But this was also used by his rivals in an attempt to bankrupt him. Using his funds, he purchased two ships and decided to begin an export business in the West Indies and Europe. Ill advised, he attempted to send bed warmers, a popular contraption in New England, to the tropical West Indies. For anyone else, this would have been disastrous, yet with Dexter's unusual luck, it was behind him. His ship captain sold them as ladles to the local molasses industry, and he made a huge profit. This started a series of odd cargo shipments that made Dexter fortunes. But the only thing Dexter didn't have going for him was his social status, being from a poor family. Lacking connections and high society friends, the only way he could rise was if he took public office. So Dexter started writing petitions for himself to be considered for public office, and rumor has it he wouldn't stop writing them. Newburyport's local government, tired of Dexter's petitions, gave him the title the Informer of the Deer, even though no deer were in Newburyport. Regardless, high society New England still snubbed him, so he purchased a larger home from a local socialite and lavishly decorated it in an attempt to rise above it. Yet, with all the money, lavish lifestyle, and luck in business, his family life wasn't so lucky. In fact, he would frequently tell visitors his wife had died and that she was haunting the house. That's who they saw from time to time inside. He even went as far to fake his own death to see how many people would react and hosted his own funeral with 3,000 in attendance, only revealing his elaborate hoax when he was disappointed his wife wasn't crying at his funeral and not mourning enough to his liking. His lasting legacy, however, was his book, A Pickle for the Knowing Ones, he published when he was 50 years old. The book consisted of 8,847 words and 33,864 letters, but without any punctuation and with an unorthodox spelling and capitalization. The book consisted of nothing but complaints about politicians, the clergy, and his own wife. It was seen as ridiculous and unintelligent, but the public were intrigued and bought it by the masses. It was first self published, but Dexter had a second edition published by an actual publisher and even wrote a second edition containing pages full of punctuation in the appendix, with a response to the public to pepper and sod it as they please. A nonsensical and misspelt response in a very Dexter fashion. Just 9 years later, on October 28th, 1806, Timothy Dexter officially passed away, leaving his estate to his late wife. When on the grounds that the scenic views aren't beautiful enough, the gravestones dedicated to the residents could be considered equally as beautiful. Featuring religious expression from the Puritan period and exemplary artistic carvings, its gravestones are extremely impressive. Winged Death's head, crossbones, hourglasses, the willow in the urn, and epitaphs reflecting the era of the settlers' passing can be seen throughout. Two gravestones feature coat of arms, which is unusual in a small American burial ground. The most unusual and elaborate is for resident Susan Jane, carved by Henry Christian Gare. The gravestone is now protected, being encased in granite, but you can still appreciate its unique beauty. Carved in slate is Death, the central figure represented by a crown of laurels with a celestial object in each hand, the moon in one and the sun in the other. Behind Death is a Sith, used to reap its harvest of souls, encircled by a snake with its tail in the mouth. On the top corners of the gravestone are winged cherubs, then on the bottom corners are bats from the underworld. At the very top, adorning the pendular, is an hourglass, flanked by bones, all symbolic to the era, meaning death moves in when time runs out. Yet not many find themselves within old burial ground for the views or the gravestones, but here because of one scene from the cult favorite Hocus Pocus was filmed there. The main character, Max, meets the two school bullies who jump out from a gravestone, stopping him on the way home from school, then proceed to steal his new cross trainers. Although a small scene, many fans make the journey to see the iconic cemetery. But do the ghoulish ghosts of All Hallows Eve, as the veil thins, come alive on the burial ground? Reports of Mama Red possibly haunting Old Burial Hill have been claimed. Many believe before she hung, she cursed Marblehead, saying this town will burn. Apparitions, footsteps, disembodied voices, cold spots, and the feeling you're being watched all have been reported, which is odd for this burial ground because it feels so open when you visit. Horror writer H.P. Lovecraft even mentions the grounds in his short story The Festival from the book The Gothic Stories of H.P. Lovecraft. One haunting said to not be on the grounds but in the cove below is claimed. Known as Screeching Woman Cove, it's named after an innocent woman who was murdered by pirates in the cove sometime around the 1600s. If you're quiet and lucky enough on a clear day, you can still hear her scream. Or could it just be the wind? Breaking away from the Halloween hysteria in Salem and taking a break with an old Burial Hill with its New England charms completes any fall trip, in the Grimm's opinion. We hope you do remember Captain Mugford and his crew's bravery at the top of the hill looking out at the Salem Sound, if you do find yourself within Old Burial Hill. The grave grind for Old Burial Hill was a chocolate and toffee nut latte from the Glug Glug Cafe in Salem. For more honorary grinds in the area, please visit the-grim.com. For now, we're closing the gate on Old Burial Hill. We hope you enjoyed our dig into history. If you did, please leave us a 5-star review wherever we're haunting your podcast queue, and follow our Instagram at the_grim_podcast, or subscribe today to join us next time when we open the gate on the Grim.